So, there are elder dragons in the Forbidden Lands.
Elder dragons? Like multiple of them?
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, in the not too distant future, but definitely within the next couple of years at least, we'll get to experience the proper evolution of Monster Hunter Wilds with the release of its Master Rank expansion. Some people might not agree that an expansion is always better than the base Monster Hunter game, but it's undeniable that it is the most complete version of that game, the one that most matches the developer's vision of what it could be. Base Monster Hunter Wilds has been relatively unique for its just pure absence of elder dragons. Zoshia is very elder dragon-like, but is technically a construct monster, not an elder. And Title Update 4 finally added Gogmazios, who is our only proper elder dragon in all of Wilds, so elder dragons are pretty scarce right now, and it's looking like there's potential that there will be a bit more of a focus on them in the Master Rank expansion. So today I want to talk about the 10 elder dragons that I think are most likely to show up within the expansion, and while I'm trying to keep the things that make sense and we can sort of expect, I also want to add a bit of potential flair for the more obvious suggestions in the group. For example, in our first slot today, I've got a member of the classic Elder Dragon trio that has appeared in the largest number of games, specifically Teostra. Teostra himself, the big fiery blast monster that looks like a big demonic flying lion, he would easily fit into the oilwell basin as a map, and you could even argue for the windward plains as well. But then also I think there's a small possibility of, instead of just getting regular Teostra, maybe we don't get him at all, instead we get Toa Tesukatora, the origin species version of Teostra and Lunastra from Frontier, which is essentially an ancient ancestor of those monsters who uses ice and cold-based attacks instead of fire and blast. And its main sort of mechanic was essentially when enraged it would form a blizzard around it that would build up a debuff very similar to how Frostblight works right now in Wilds, unless you are moving, and when you're moving you don't have it build up. And I feel like it's a very directly translatable mechanic that you could totally put into Wilds Master Rank expansion, and so you could totally make this monster work in Wilds. And I think it would be fun to bring back like the Elder Trio, the classic Elder Trio, but instead of bringing in their base versions at all, don't bring in the base versions and instead have cool, funky variations. And I think if they're willing to spice it up in some way, this would be a really fun way to do it. For example, we got Guardian Fulguranjanath with no base version, or no thing that wasn't a Guardian either. Same with Guardian Ebonio Dogoron in Wilds. And if you're going to say, well, Elder Dragons are different, they wouldn't just do that with an Elder, well, we had Crimson Glow Valstrax in Risebreak without a regular Valstrax in that game too. So spicy versions of returning monsters, I think, are a reasonable guess. Past that, Toa is a perfect option as an origin species because my expectations of the expansion are to dive deeper into the ancient civilization of Wyveria itself, and within it we could find some species that simply don't exist anywhere else anymore. And I love the idea of bringing in origin species as a way to represent that. This was also probably the longest entry today, but continuing the theme from it, Kushala Daora would fit great, another member of the classic Elder Trio, and I'd say arguably he would fit a bit better on the Scarlet Forest compared to the Iceshard Cliffs, just because there's more space for his flying and tornado shenanigans. But keeping in line with my Teostra entry, I would love to, instead of seeing regular Kushala Daora, don't bring him, instead just give us rusted Kushala Daora specifically with a revamped, recreated version of that fight. I've always loved the idea of a more grounded physical Kushala as opposed to the heavily aerial fight that the normal one has, and not only do I think it would be a great time to revisit rusted Kushala in a Monster Hunter game, especially with Wilds having so many connections to 4 and 4 Ultimate, but also rusted was considered the joint final boss of Village storyline of 4 Ultimate, and I also think that they could do a really good job of recreating this fight in Wilds in a way that would make it feel even more different from regular Kushala. Next up to finish off the Elder Trio is Chameleos. I love the jittery, poisonous mist lizard who looks like he drank a few too many coffees, and he doesn't actually have a proper alternate version in the series aside from Risen Chameleos in Sunbreak, which is more of like an enhancement than a fully different creature. So I'd love to see a brand new Chameleos variation, maybe make him like a Guardian Chameleos and play around with Wilk Mist as a concept, or take an idea from Generations and give him the confusion status like Malfestio and have a new variant Chameleos that uses that instead. Give him the mist that reverses movement controls when you stand inside of it instead of being poison or being invisible, and that could be really, really neat. But the main thing is I think the idea of the classic Elder Trio, but all of them being variants or rare species or subspecies or origin species, would be a really cool way to subvert expectations just a little bit. After that is the thing I think will 100% be in Master Rank expansion here, Shagaru Magala. We have never had a full game that has gore without also getting Shagaru Magala. Yes, the sample size is small so far, it's only been 3 games, but they're so intrinsically tied together, and especially with gore even being story relevant in base wilds, and with 4th gen characters all around, it just simply feels guaranteed, honestly, and I'd be silly not to include Shagaru, the angelic counterpart to gore, on this list as a result. And to take it a step further, I wonder if they would try to tie Shagaru and Frenzy Virus into part of Wyveria's downfall in the story too. I could totally see that happening. Following that, Mohran. This was the big spectacle opening fight of Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate, riding on a sand ship through the desert, chasing alongside a massive pointy monster, firing siege weaponry, and occasionally getting to climb up and fight on top. Again, I cannot help but make the 4th gen comparisons. There's so many 4th gen references in Wilds, and things even like gogmazios being our final title update monster for base Wilds. It's just very clearly connected to Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate. So imagine starting the Master Rank expansion for Wilds like the start of Monster Hunter 4, on a sand ship chasing Mohran, but in the Windward Plains, or an offshoot special arena of the Windward Plains with the same visual theme. And it would even reflect the start of base Wilds, because we also start on a sand ship and jump off to fight Dala'dur. And I could possibly even imagine, instead of it being like exclusively sand ship combat, we could probably run alongside Mohran on our sacrets and do mounted attacks with that whole system that they made too, that doesn't get used all that much in the game properly. Maybe even use it as a mechanic where we have to do damage to him from our sacred to direct him in different ways, bring him along a specific path where the ship's siege weaponry will be most effective, or maybe we've set up traps or something like that. I just think this fight would make a lot of sense, and that it can be done incredibly well in an expansion to Wilds. On a similar wavelength, Dalamadur. Dalamadur is one of the most divisive creatures in my own head. He's still like a top 20 monster all time for me, just because his design of a world-eating serpent with all the spiky spines on him and stuff is oozing with coolness, and then his clunky little arms make me laugh every time I see them, which I like a lot too. But I feel like his fight is one of the most improvable monster fights in the entire series if brought into a modern Monster Hunter game. Not because his original fight was like particularly awful, honestly, it was a really cool spectacle for the time, but he didn't feel much like you were fighting an actual monster. And with how they have handled oversized creatures in Wilds, especially gigantic things like gogmazios, I could totally see them doing justice to a fight with Dalamadur in this game, in this engine, and in the expansion, who again would of course be another thread that ties the game to 4 and 4 Ultimate, as Dalamadur was the final boss of online quests in 4. On the note of oversized monsters and spectacle fights being done really well in Wilds, Dire Morales. I have big hopes that Wilds will dive more into remaking returning Black Dragons, especially due to the existence of Zoshia being basically influenced by Black Dragon movesets. Dire Morales has gone the longest of any Black Dragon since his last game entry, and his design is impressive as hell. It's incredibly cool, and his fight is mostly just swim around and slap his weak spots or avoid his attacks on land while hitting his weak spots, and while the monster itself is very cool in so many ways, the fight was definitely lacking, which is partially just a symptom of the time that it was made, similar to Dalamadur. A modern Dire Morales remake could be incredible, especially if they do something like maybe make use of a variation of the underwater mechanics from the Legiacris fight in Wilds. Maybe don't make it like a big focus of the fight like it used to be, but just make it so you can pop one of his magma circles through underwater combat, but while you're in the water, you constantly drain health to represent his raw heat aura and what he does to aquatic life. And you could easily justify him showing up in like a special arena that is themed to be like a shoreline of the Scarlet Forest as well. I guess where I'm sitting here is I think at least one Black Dragon is likely to happen in the expansion, and if it's only one, I would personally like it to be Dire Morales, but there's one that's probably more likely if it's only one, which is our next entry, White Fatalis, or Old Fatalis as he is being rebranded as these days. But I'll tell you what, I will start calling him Old Fatalis once he is released in a game being called Old Fatalis with his name. If he comes back in Wilds Master Rank expansion as Old Fatalis, I'll finally change my ways, but until that day he's still White Fatalis to me because they've never had real names in game. That was what we've always referred to him as. After the absolute smashing success of regular Fatalis, that is the final monster released for Iceborne's title updates, I feel like it's a near guarantee that one day we will get the same level of quality remake applied to White Fatalis, his red lightning wielding comrade. Again, Wilds has been incredible with oversized monster fights so far, so an expansion could definitely do that fight justice if they gave it a similar treatment to regular Fatalis, but one that fits a bit more to the king of all Fatalis, and I think it would be a great way to cap off the game at the end. I could even see them doing a similar pattern to Elatrion into Fatalis like they did in Iceborne, and instead doing Dire Moralis as the second to last title update, then White Fatalis as the final title update. Or hey, maybe it's time for a brand new Black Dragon at the heart of Wyveria instead. Those are all the ones that I think have reasonably followable explanations for showing up in the Master Rank expansion, but there are a couple more that I think I can make solid cases for too. Nergigante is a big one. With base wilds very much ignoring Elder Dragons until the very end of title updates, we are likely to have one of two things happen in the expansion. Either they will keep that same trend and keep the non-elders feeling more powerful by having less elders around, and then only have a couple of elders at the very top end, or what I think is potentially more likely is a massive oversaturation of Elder Dragons. A lot of elders, maybe even too many elders. If this is the case, if a bunch of species of Elder Dragons start showing up, it would almost be a natural progression to bring in Nergigante, a monster who feeds on Elder Dragons. And in his original appearance, he lived where he lived because of the concentration of Elder Dragons that were on death's door. Sure, they would likely be healthier here because there's no like rotten veil for them to go die in, but I feel like if there are suddenly like 10 species of Elder Dragons around, it's a very easy leap to say, and then Nergigante came because its food source was abundant. And also, I just love to see what Nergigante would be like in Wild personally. I feel like he would be an incredible fight with like offset weapons, especially now, and you could even make it like a guardian Nergigante that the civilization used as like an anti-Elder Dragon. But the point is, I don't think Nergi is out of the question by any means. Then finally today, Kirin, or more specifically, Guardian Kirin. Just by the nature of what Guardian monsters tend to do, creating Wilk crystals that pop out of the ground, you could have it basically take bits of the Arashi Kirin fight, where you could replace icicle-based attacks with Wilksicles, and then you could use regular Kirin lightning strike patterns to trigger the Wilk crystals into exploding, almost like mixing Arashi Kirin and regular Kirin into one monster that sort of benefits itself. And while there's no like story or ecological reason for me making this prediction, it's entirely just because I have this image in my head, this vision of what that fight could be, the absolutely glorious chaos, and I think that would be just incredible for the game if they did decide to do it. And just to mention it, I think Kirin would inherently be less annoying in a game that has focus mode, as a big part of the annoyance that I had with him, at least personally, was how hard it is to actually hit his good hit zones and deal proper damage to him. And focus mode fixes that instantly for a lot of weapons for most of his motions, and then it's just a matter of dealing with the moves that he does instead of being irritated by your own ability to deal damage to him. All that stuff said then, I would love new Elder Dragons more than any returning thing that could happen pretty much, and top of the list for new ones would be something like a cephalopod shaped Elder Dragon to be the big over the top version of those creatures, maybe like a giant land squid, I don't know, but it would be cool to have. Then there are things like a Guardian Atul Ka that could be like firing Elder Breakers at you from a distance, and that would be hilarious, but it's probably a little bit too crazy for them to actually do that unless it was like the final title update monster and there weren't Black Dragons. And I also think there's space for something like Namiel in the Scarlet Forest during inclemency, or Velkhana could be fun in like the Jin Dahaad special arena version of the Iceshard Cliffs, but those are all things that I think I just have in my mind because I think they would be neat, more than because I think they're likely in any sense. I don't think they're more likely than anything I had on the list, but I still wanted to mention them. All in all, this was just me talking about what Elder Dragons I think have some sort of reasonable explanation to come back in the Wilds Master Rank expansion, beyond just because the developers wanted them to return. I'd honestly be surprised if we even get 10 Elder Dragons in the game total, but I think a lot of the ones on this list have a decent chance of being chosen in any returning Elder Dragon slots that are available in the expansion. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and feel free to throw in your own suggestions in the comments down below as well. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.